In this video, I'm going to give you 3 ways to check whether or not an organization is actually legitimate, and I'm focusing specifically on those smaller community-led organizations. Let's get into it. Hey there, this is Tiffany with Boss on a Budget. So I help people start their nonprofits and raise money for their nonprofits. But I know that there are a lot of people who may not be ready to start a nonprofit, but they still want to help. They still want to give money to other people who are doing the work. But the big hiccup with that is that you're not sure who to trust. And you're not alone. So there's data that suggests that people are losing trust in nonprofit organizations. But this is what I believe. I do believe that people who are connected to smaller local community efforts trust those efforts more because they're closer to those efforts, they're more attached to those efforts. So I don't necessarily believe that people are losing trust in nonprofits across the board. I think that depends. And so what I want to do is support you if you're watching this video and you really do want to help another nonprofit to decide how to do that and how to make the best decision when you are ready to give. And I'm coming at this because I help local and small nonprofits every single day try to attract people like you, their donors and their funders, to get money. And so I'm going to tell you how to find the right match, how to find the right alignment so that when you're ready to give, you know who exactly to go to and pointers for how to find them. And if you're interested in knowing about local nonprofits doing work all across the country, make sure you subscribe to this channel. When I go live, you'll see all the nonprofits show up and talk about all the great work that they're doing. So that is another way you can be keyed into other organizations who may be in your area doing good work in your community. So let's get started. I want to share 3 ways that you can check to make sure that an organization that you want to give to is actually a legitimate organization, especially for those local, small community nonprofits. Now, traditionally, if you look this up in Google and you're trying to figure out how do I pick a legitimate organization, you're going to see articles that say, oh, check Charity Navigator, check GuideStar or Candid, because they have listings of organizations and they actually rank the organizations. There are different levels that organizations can achieve if they meet certain standards. So traditionally, that's what you will see. But this is the thing that I just want to lift up for you. A lot of times, if it's a small or local organization, they may not have the staff capacity, they may be all volunteer, to be able to maintain those accounts and maintain those profiles and do everything they need to do to make sure that they're keeping up with what's listed for their organization on these online profiles. And as more and more sites pop up, it's hard to keep track of all that. So just because an organization isn't listed on Charity Navigator or doesn't have a high rating or is missing information on one of these websites doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't trust them and you should not support them. So I know your question is, well, if I can't use a website like that, then what should I use? So that's the point of this video. But first thing I will say is, don't let that be your only way to measure. You can absolutely use those websites if that's what you choose to do. I'm not bashing them. But here are 3 other ways you can test out and see what works best for you when you're ready to give. The first thing I would suggest you do is to develop relationships with small organizations first. So sometimes when people are ready to give to organizations, it's often in a crisis. So maybe there's like a national disaster or like a hurricane or something, or there's like a critical event, and a lot of people get mobilized and they want to help. And then they're scrambling trying to figure out, well, who do I give to? How do I know who to trust? And my suggestion to you is, if you know you're one of those people who like to respond with giving of your money or giving of your time, get to know the local organizations in your community first. So smaller organizations typically do things like food drives, clothes drives. They typically exhibit at fairs, right? So you may see little events that they're doing, volunteer opportunities that pop up that give you the chance to see in real time how they operate and the impact that they make. So that's one way you can identify those community organizations, because they're often doing work. They're often trying to get groups of people or volunteers to support the work that they do. So you can figure out who they are just by researching that, just seeing all the events in places where they show up. But I suggest also you develop a relationship by speaking with them. Talk to the founders, talk to the board members, get a sense for what their vision and their mission is, understand what their motivation is, hear their origin stories, because a lot of people who start these nonprofits have their own lived experience, and a lot of times they're creating their nonprofits because of something they've encountered or someone they know has encountered, or they're used to providing those services to people and they get fed up and like, look, I got to start something because nobody else is doing that. And so by talking to these people, hearing their stories, getting to know them, being genuinely interested in understanding why they started this organization, why they do what they do, you can begin to see where your values align. And if what they're saying and what they're talking about really resonates with you and it makes sense to you, then that helps to build trust with that organization. So that when it's time to give, when you want to be generous, or when the opportunity presents itself to do some good in your community, you already have those connections and you can feel better about choosing an organization that you've actually engaged with or done something with. So my suggestion to you is find the organizations that are doing work in your community. If you really pay attention, you can identify these organizations, but you can also identify organizations by tapping into your local United Way, by tapping into your local nonprofit association. They have different names from state to state, but if you go to the National Council of Nonprofits, they have a listing of all the nonprofit associations across the country. And then you can also tap into your local community foundation. All of these are Googleable, I just made up that word, Googleable names that you can look up in your local area and find the contact information to be able to find local organizations as well if you're having trouble figuring out who these organizations are and where they are. And then when they do have events, attend those events, try to volunteer first, or just look up the people, find their contact information, find their emails and say, hey, I'm interested in what you're doing and I would love to talk to you more. Now, if that organization is hungry enough, if that organization is actually legitimate, then they would welcome somebody coming to them saying they can help, right? They would welcome somebody coming to them saying, hey, I want to support. But I would just say to you, if you're going to offer support, just be clear about what you're able to do and what you're not able to do. So be very clear about your expectations. If you can only volunteer a certain way, then don't overpromise. Or if you just want to learn more about what they're doing, just say that. Just be very clear and transparent about what you want. But in developing those relationships and talking to people, you grow. You begin to understand better the issues that are happening in your community that you may not realize are happening. And that can help you make better and wiser decisions when it's time to give your money. My second suggestion is to research their footprint. And so when I say footprint, I mean, where have they made an impact or where have they left clues about the work that they do? And that could be online and it also could be in your local area. So I just spoke about how in your local area, sometimes you'll see flyers for clothing drives or you'll see flyers for different volunteer or community events. That's a lot of how you can find what organizations are doing. So look at past events, go on Eventbrite and see the work that they've done. Check out their websites and see the history of events or things that they've done in the past so you can feel comfortable to see whether or not they're actually legitimate, they're actually doing something, there are actually activities happening. You should also check out any social media posts that they have. How often do they post? What do they post about? Are they sharing stories about what they're doing? Are they just broadcasting events or are they also sharing information about changes that have happened with people they've worked with, about compelling stories, right? Are they showing the behind the scenes about the work that they're doing? Because that can give you an indication of how they do their work, of what their approach is, and whether or not that resonates with you. Look at any articles that the founder has written or look at any information that they produce to talk about the issue, because if they present like they know or are experts on the issue that you care about, then you can feel more confident that they know how to do the work and they can execute effectively. Because part of this isn't just about them doing, it's about them doing it effectively. So any organization can say that they are doing the work, but is it actually making a change? Is it actually making a difference? And I'm assuming that if you want to give your dollars, you want to give your dollars to something that actually changes something. So check that out. Look and see what stories they share. What images do they share? What are they talking about when it comes to the results of their services. Do they have newsletters through email or through the mail where you can see their impact, you can see their footprint, you can basically see their history and see what they've done. Seeing that history and having that documentation can give you a little bit more assurance that the organization is actually legitimate and will do what it says it's going to do with your dollars. The third suggestion I would say is check with your state. So in most states in the country, you may not realize this, but nonprofits are required to register if they're going to be asking for money. It's not every single state, but it's the majority of the states. So that responsibility for tracking that registration and regulating that usually sits with the Attorney General's office. 9 times out of 10, it's the Attorney General, but if it's not, then your state is probably a little different and you can probably try to figure out through context clues where to go. But it's called charitable registration or charitable solicitation. So what you can do is check in with your Attorney General's office to make sure that an organization that you want to give to is actually registered in your state. So why is that important? It's important because that gives you a little bit more assurance that the nonprofit that you're trying to support knows the rules and understands the field that they're working in. There has to be some accountability on the nonprofit side to be able to know and have the right paperwork in place, because if they can get that right and if they're responsible with that, then that's a sign and a clue that they'll be responsible when donations come in or with financial tracking and accounting. And a lot of times with this charitable registration, they have to submit financial documents and financial records to show the money they raised and where the money came from. That's a requirement often with these state forms. So if a nonprofit has applied for charitable registration and has gone through that process, then they've had to figure out financial statements and reporting, right? They had to do some kind of internal work to get that together. So that can be an indication for you that you can trust that organization a little bit more because they've had to at least go through state processes, which not everybody understands or knows about. So before I give the honorable mention, because I do want to mention one more thing that I think would be helpful for you if you're trying to figure out which organizations to trust, I want you to understand that small organizations are doing good work every single day, but they often do not have the capacity to keep up. So some of the traditional ways that we use to measure whether or not an organization is legitimate or we should give to them is dependent on whether or not they have the staff to even produce that stuff. So for example, some organizations, if they have a certain budget, are required to have audits. But if you have a small budget, you cannot afford an audit that costs $7,000, $8,000 a year. But just because your financial statements aren't audited doesn't mean that you're not doing good work. And let's be real, there are extremes on both sides. There are some organizations that go through audits and lie and cook their books and they take your money, and there are some organizations that are smaller that are doing great work but can't afford to have that level of scrutiny or have all those structures in place. So I just want to keep in mind that just because an organization is small doesn't mean it should automatically be disqualified. But I'm not saying that they still shouldn't be responsible and accountable to make sure they're being responsible with their financial donations. All I'm saying is don't count them out, okay? And that's the point of me doing this video, because I want you to be aware that there are so many great organizations doing good work that are being unnoticed and being ignored. So the last thing I want to say is that if you're trying to figure out which organizations to give to, try giving small donations to multiple organizations so you can kind of test the waters to see which organizations resonate with you, which organizations that they really appeal to you. Okay, so when you first learn about an organization, you may not know much about them, and through giving and them connecting with you and communicating with you, you may learn more, but you may not know that or have the time to know that before it's time to give. So my suggestion, and it may be a radical one to you, but I think it makes a lot of sense, is for you to give smaller donations to multiple organizations to test the waters. And then as you begin to develop relationships, you may decide, oh, I really am drawn to this mission, so I'm going to give a bigger donation, right? Or I'm going to become even more invested, and it's going to be, you're going to stair step it. Because you just don't realize how much one donation can make a difference to these organizations. So you're still doing good, even if it's a smaller gift, and then you decide to go deeper on just one or two organizations. You're still doing some good by giving to multiple organizations in your community. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you are interested in starting your own nonprofit, or you just want to know what this nonprofit thing is about, you can also download my free nonprofit startup checklist. And I also have some resources on my website at bossonabudget.com. So if you have more questions or want to learn more, you can go there. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.